Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Community, how to build a values-aligned seven-figure business. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So, as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So, definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the conversation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Nareet Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple of polls just to step back, see how everyone here is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? How are you feeling about your business? And we'll give it just a couple moments for folks to respond here. Thank you, thank you. Give it one more moment. All right, I'm gonna end this poll and share these results. Awesome. All right, looks like we got optimism coming up in the lead. Always great to see, but definitely have some feelings of fear, anxious, and surviving. So I'm very confident that our conversation today may help alleviate some of those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second one. What is keeping you up at night? Is it finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can make sure that the programs and resources we develop going forward are meaningful for all of you. Awesome. We got folks from Massachusetts, Ohio, DC, Kentucky, Maryland, California, Georgia, New Jersey, Virginia Beach, Mexico, Michigan, awesome, Italy, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, Idaho, welcome, welcome, Tennessee, Washington, Florida, Indiana. Awesome. So great to have folks in from all over the place. That's wonderful. All right. Florida with snow, absolutely. All right, I'll give this poll one more moment. And I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, so looks like marketing coming up in the lead, finance and sales very close behind, but we got needs all across the board here. So thank you all so much for participating, super helpful. I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Gesche Haas, founder and CEO at Dreamers and Doers. Gesche, such a pleasure and so excited to have you here with us today to share your story and some of the lessons that you've learned. So thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so thrilled to be here. And I also love that you started with real talk and really just dove into it. So I can't wait to continue this conversation with you.
Awesome. Well, I know we're going to learn so much about you and your story, and dreamers and doers, of course. Could you maybe just give, like a 30-second introduction on who you are and what Dreamers and Doers is all about?
Yes. So my name is Gesche, and I started Dreamers and Doers at this point nearly 11 years ago. I'll dive into the origin story in a little bit, but it was a very happy accident that happened out of a personal need. Dreamers and Doers is an award-winning community and PR hype machine, and we amplify extraordinary women entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders.
Amazing, wonderful. And I'm sure we have some in the audience that may be part of the community, maybe are aware of Dreamers and Doers and the incredible impact that's going on over there. So awesome. Let's jump right in. And, you just kind of mentioned this a little bit, that Dreamers and Doers kind of started as, from personal needs to address challenges that you yourself were facing. And so can you talk more about what inspired you to create this business and how did you recognize its potential for broader impact?
Yes. And I loved that you asked and you just went straight to it in terms of what are the challenges, what are keeping everyone who's in the audience right now up at night. So my background is that I'd actually worked in finance. I was an investor for half a decade and had worked for several early stage companies. And you might think like, oh, that would prepare you for starting your own company. But I think nothing can prepare you for starting your own company unless you go through starting your own company, because it's just such a unique journey where in my case, I had existential fears. I was like, actually, Dreamers and Doers, I ended up spending 2 years not making an income initially, and I can dive into that more, but just like the existential fears that you have when you are building something from scratch. And in the early days, like now I look around and I run a business that is all about support. But my friends and family at the time could not relate. They weren't entrepreneurs. My father kept asking me, when are you getting a real job again? So this is kind of where Dreamers and Doers started, from that mindset, feeling very lonely, very alone, misunderstood. And everything changed when I joined forces with one other woman. We like calling her the OG Dreamer and Doer. And what happened there was like we connected and we were having exactly the same beliefs, exactly the same doubts. And then we had this idea, why don't we just meet up? And what we did was that we met up over brunch, we brought our computers, we spent the whole day working as well as supporting each other on a very practical and emotional level. So when we had limiting beliefs or if we had questions, tangible questions about the business, we were there to support each other and we didn't feel alone. And then from that moment onwards, it was the one thing I couldn't stop working on. So every weekend I would organize brunches, and then it turned from 2 women to 3 women to 5 women to 10 women. And it grew and grew and grew from there. And even in the early days, some people were like, why don't you make this your business? Because I was tinkering with like different business ideas. And I kept saying initially, it's not a business. This is, just this community thing I'm doing. But lo and behold, still a year into it, it was the thing I couldn't stop working on. So basically, I resisted it until I could no longer resist it because it had taken off so much. I poured so much of myself into it. And I was seeing the huge impact it was having, where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to stop everything else I'm working and I need to dive all in and see what this could be. And it's also interesting that you specifically asked, like, business. How did you know this was a business? And I actually didn't know immediately because some people were like, oh, maybe this could be a nonprofit. Maybe this could be this. Maybe this could be that. But I think it's so beautiful as an entrepreneur. There's so many decisions that we need to make that could profoundly change our trajectory and our company's trajectory. And for me personally, because we were building a community that was focused on supporting women entrepreneurs, it was really important that the business itself was a business. So that's kind of a little bit of the origin story of how Dreamers Doers was the thing I couldn't stop working on. And then now, a decade later, it's a 7-figure business that has an amazing team and has had such an impact. The final thing I'll say is like, obviously the early days were hard. And the heart just evolves. So it's not like, oh, you quote unquote make it and then every day is just rainbow and sunshine. It's just like, just different challenges come up. So I just like keeping it really real.
Yeah. Such an incredible story. And I think, your story in particular demonstrates just the importance of, finding those people that are, you know, thinking about the same issues in the world or facing the same problems, or kind of, see the world in a similar way. And it's so incredible that just that, initial relationship that you had with that original dreamer and doer,
Yes.
you called them, is blossomed into something so incredible. And so it just goes to show that, like, any one interaction can really be the foundation for something amazing.
Exactly. And not being so set, like, oh, it has to go this way or that way. Like, I think if all of us actually check in our lives, like the most incredible things that have ever happened were things we couldn't have anticipated.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. And so you just kind of briefly touched on this a moment ago, thinking about some of your the challenges that you faced in your early days as a first-time founder. What were some of those roadblocks, and how did they shape the vision and structure of Dreamers and Doers?
Yes. I like categorizing them into internal and external struggles. So some of the external ones you heard were like, oh, my friends and family couldn't quite relate. Why are you doing this? And then just any entrepreneur, I feel like you're beating the odds and by creating something from nothing and doing so many things for the first time. Then internally, I didn't realize this at the time, but I had or the extent of it, but I had a lot of limiting beliefs. And I think it is normal. Anything you're doing for the first time, like you can't, it's really hard to show up and be like, I'm the most incredible founder if you've never built a business. So believing in myself and then having a community that would help like be the sounding board was just so helpful. And it's interesting because the struggles that I had directly impacted the business that I built. So basically, I had a need of community. I had a need of like tangible resources. I'm doing all of this for the first time. And even like that, for lack of a better word, like cheerleading. So one thing we do, for example, is that we have what we call a PR hype machine. And what happened there was like, it's because us needing to believe in ourselves is really important. And sometimes it starts with how others perceive us, right? And then one day, one other member, she wrote an article about myself, and it was not even in a fancy publication. It was on her personal blog. And that was the first time that others could perceive the business I was building through someone else's eyes. And then
Mm.
by seeing just how much it resonated, it changed how others perceived my business. They were suddenly asked, because initially people were like, how's that little project going? What else are you working on? And
Yeah.
people had a harder time taking it serious. And the moment we had that external validation, like things changed, like the way I perceived myself, but also the way others perceived myself. And so by having these needs myself, this is what we directly built into the offerings of Dreamers Doers. So one, it being a community. One, very vetted, tangible resources, because we only have so much time. So us vetting the resources for members. Then also having PR, being able to make it super accessible, because that is just an amazing way to increase your chances of success, but also impact how you internally view yourself. And that changes everything. I like this saying that your success is 80% internal, 20% external. And it's so easy to be like, what strategy do I need? What's the to-do that I need to do? But if you're doing this from a place that comes from scarcity or thinking you'll fail already or thinking you've nothing to add, then none of those strategies will work and will do really well. But then spending more energy also on the inner work or whatever you particularly need to show up in a way that will then impact everything else and the external.
Right, right. Oh, so incredible. And I know we have so many, we've done a couple sessions in recent months kind of where we've discussed, how entrepreneurs can identify and overcome those limiting beliefs.
Yes.
Really, really tough, and it's so unique to each individual. But yeah, no, I think that's so incredible. And as entrepreneurs are kind of going through this journey for the first time, it really is so important to really uh, you know understand, that those challenges can be the foundation for something greater. And so really taking them as kind of, an opportunity for growth and learning. So love that.
And I
And
actually want to share like a really like some tangible tips because so we all obviously have our own set of limiting beliefs. And one thing that's really interesting is like first actually identifying what they are, because sometimes we're so on autopilot, we don't even realize that it's a limiting belief. We just think this is normal, this is how the world is, and of course I'm not capable, or whatever it is, you fill in the blanks. And if the audience wants to actually try this out, you can actually put in the chat like what is a limiting belief you have, and then put three beliefs that that could replace it. So let's say I'm going to come up with one to give a really simple example, like, oh, I'm not capable. And then the really important part about upgrading your beliefs is it needs to be something that you can believe in. So it might be tricky to be immediately go to like, I'm the most competent human in the whole wide world. But maybe it's like, what if that wasn't true? What if I'm learning, I'm getting better every day? And so forth and so forth. And the more we work on this subconscious belief, like we can actually reprogram our subconscious, and it just shifts everything. And I also dare to say, sometimes we're most self-conscious about the things we actually excel at, right? Like, because we are so dialed into like, oh, could I do this better? Could I do that better? Was I kind enough? Did I do that? Like, it's really interesting that those are actually sometimes our superpowers, and we don't even realize it, or we don't allow them to be our superpowers in the way that they deserve to be.
right. That's so interesting because I feel like sometimes like the mind can go the opposite way where like you feel good about yourself and then you start asking like, am I really, in the right position, or is this really, am I really doing well? But you're kind of talking about doing the opposite where like, you have these limiting beliefs and instead you're questioning yourself. You're like, what if I can do this? What if this isn't true? What if it's possible? And so taking kind of that same strategy that can be so easy for us to use to spiral or keep us in with those limiting beliefs, and really turning it around into questioning those limiting beliefs directly.
Yes.
So that's so powerful.
Yeah. You want to turn your inner critic into your inner champion. And for me, it also really helps to understand the cognitive distortions that we as humans like engage in, where as a default, most humans overweight negatives and underweight positives. So if we proactively overweight positives, like we're already winning, and it just makes the journey also so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. And so, we've really touched on this quite a bit so far, how your journey really does highlight the importance of building a business aligned with your values. And so what can entrepreneurs do today to begin to identify a path that feels personally and professionally fulfilling for them individually?
And this was like this big light bulb moment for myself, where I realized when I was on my own, working on my own business, that I'd gone through life, and probably so many of us, where like in school, there's a certain thing we need to do to get a good grade. Then when we work for someone else, there's a certain thing we need to do to get a promotion. But then when you're out on your own, like you need to really nurture your inner compass so much, because every decision that you make is going to have such a profound impact on your business and your life. So three things have really helped me. One was journaling, and really nitty-gritty journaling, where at the end of the day, I'd sit down and be like, how am I feeling right now? And why? And really go into the details, maybe like, oh, I feel just so tired and exhausted. I'm like, what did I do today? I'm like, I had a bunch of meetings. I'm like, I think I don't enjoy back-to-back meetings. I enjoy this more. And just really getting into the granular details, because we don't always have that privilege of even asking ourselves, what do we want? And now when we're on our own journey, like it's essential that we do that. Then I really like this exercise, because sometimes you're like, okay, I need to make this big decision, but what path should I go on? And I like pretending. What I do is like I try to like kind of change my brain waves, and maybe you can do it in the morning when you've woken up, or just like when you're resting a bit. And then just trying to imagine, I try to immediately think, I'm like, oh, maybe it's like 5 to 10 years from now. And I like to imagine like I'm in a bar, even though these days I don't drink at all, but just still imagining like I was a little tipsy. So I'm like a little bit more calm, like relaxed. And then I meet someone for the first time, and they ask me, what do I do for work? And then I imagine a few scenarios, and I imagine like, if I went this path, what would my life look like? And then I just imagine I'm describing to the person what I'm working on, what my life looks like. And then instinctually, I already have an immediate like feeling like, oh, this feels heavy. Oh, this feels exciting. Oh, this feels a certain way. And obviously this doesn't give you the entire roadmap of strategies, but I do think it gives you a really good gut that, and then sometimes like things for you to like investigate further, like, why did it feel so heavy? You know, what's going on? Maybe it's a limiting belief I need to shift. Maybe it's something that I'm overriding, and it gives like a good sense of like what we actually care about. Like there's so many shoulds in life, or so many expectations that other people have on us, but what is it that are true essence ones? And that's what's going to have us succeed the most. Because I firmly believe like I'd rather fail at something I love than succeed at something I hate. Because if I succeed at something I hate, like I can only do so good of a job. And will I actually enjoy the path, and will I be able to do well? I don't think so. And then the last part, which is really tempting to not do, especially as an early stage founder, is to not work all the time. So it's so easy to be doing, and then feeling like, oh my gosh, I need to, if I just do this one extra hour, maybe I will be more successful, or the business will break even, or whatever it is. And that 1 hour it's way more like our 10x ideas, because we can do all these strategies that are 2x, or if we're like, yeah, 2x is pretty good still. But like, if we really want to have those outliers, it is those ideas we don't get while we're like, focused on this task, but we get it in the shower, we get it while we're taking a walk. So really building that in, and also figuring out what it is that makes us feel like most aligned to ourselves. Like, when do we feel most ourselves? And that's when we usually will have those ideas. And it can look so different for each one of us.
Yeah, yeah. Such great insight and things that entrepreneurs can kind of, think about beginning to implement for themselves. And kind of this underlying theme here that you're talking about is this, idea of reflection, and really, thinking about, what has resonated with you in the past, and what really are those things about yourself that make you stand out, and honing in on those. So that's wonderful. And I think you've talked about this a little bit, but would love to hear more about the power of focusing on a niche and what that's looked like for you. And how entrepreneurs themselves can maybe begin to narrow their audience to a more values aligned community. So what does that look like for you with like women entrepreneurs and dreamers and doers?
Absolutely. And I'd say niches are always important, especially when you start out, but they're exceptionally important for communities. Because imagine, I mean, you know that Dreamers Doers is all about values aligned women entrepreneurs that are very impressive. But let's say I told you, I have a community for every single human on the world, right? Like in this world, it would like sit very different, or like for every single woman. Like the more niche a community can be, sometimes like the more powerful in terms of like finding your people, right? Like that in the end of the day is what communities are about. So it's so important always, and especially for communities. And you can always expand your reach later, but the more niche you are at the beginning, the more focused you can be with who you're attracting, how you're communicating. And what's been beautiful for us, because we've niched down, generally you can invest a bit less in marketing. And I remember that marketing was the #1 thing that's on people's minds. But actually, the more you go deeper into the niche, because then you can create an experience that over delivers, more so than if it's like too broad. And then you will have the people that are part of the experience more likely to become your advocates. And it's, yeah, more likely to happen if it's niche. And then you can also be more targeted with the marketing that you do spend. And then it comes back down to the passion as well, right? Where I can focus on a niche that feels so aligned for me. And especially in the early days where it's so much grit is involved, it's so important that you build something that you can stick with. I like the saying that ideas are cheap, but it's more important actually with what you persevere with. Because in the early days when I was working on different business ideas, some of these businesses are now successful businesses, some of those ideas. But it didn't matter that I quote unquote had some of those ideas. I didn't stick with them. The thing that is successful now for me is the one idea I could stick with, and it's also evolved over time. And also, to keep it real, like even for us, we think that there's an opportunity for us to niche down further. So when you come to our website, it still sounds somewhat broad. So one of our biggest goals of this year actually is to fine-tune our messaging even more, so that in some ways we are more polarizing, so that the women that we are for like come to our website and they're like, this is for me, I need this. And some women maybe even will come be like, oh, this is not quite my vibe, and that's perfect too. But this way we will be able to serve our niche even better. So this is all things that we are always constantly working on, and I think sometimes we can't do enough of.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting, especially, I think that's something that entrepreneurs think about as they're kind of, you know, connecting with potential customers and leading them on the path to, eventually becoming advocates for that brand. How that just highlighting how that can really be, easier to engage with a community that is a little bit more narrowed in on its focus and who you're looking to engage with and connect with. So that's so interesting, and I know that's something that's top of mind for entrepreneurs as they're kind of thinking about marketing. So wonderful. And something else top of mind for entrepreneurs, of course, always is funding. And so, would love to, learn more about, how Dreamers and Doers has grown without external funding, and what were some of the key decisions that allowed you to build a sustainable and profitable business from the start?
Yes. So one big theme on this journey was also to not optimize for lack of better word, what other people think is cool. And I think there's nothing wrong with funding. We absolutely need funding, but I think there can be a default, because you much more likely are going to see in the news like, hey, this company raised capital, rather than like, oh, this company hit profitability, right? Like it just doesn't come up in the news as much. So there was a lot of pressure just externally to raise capital, because it seemed like everyone else was doing it. Or when I went to like entrepreneur networking events, people would be like, how much did you raise? Like, and people would try to benchmark each other based on that. So it was through those like internal realigning my values to like what was important to me, is how I then realized that we didn't want to take external funding. So yes, so actually there was one time where we this might have seemed like, oh, we were killing it from the outside, but we were invited by Y Combinator to interview with them. And in that exercise, just going through it, where like we had to position everything for a venture funded business, didn't feel aligned. I just realized like I had dropped everything else in my life to work on Dreamers and Doers, because I wanted this to exist. I wanted this to exist for the long run, and I wanted to have the impact that I wanted it to have. And with that, it was this conscious decision to be like, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that we are accountable directly to our members and we're having a true impact in their lives? If we take outside capital, we can, create all these numbers and attract all these members, but are we actually creating true value, and will we be able to do this in the long run? And even just charging. So actually the first 2 years we were experimenting with a lot of things. So in some ways, like, it is a privilege to be able to, like, not everyone has a privilege to self-fund a business. And I always recommend this, like, if you have the option to maybe work on the side a little bit, because sometimes just being able to have that longer runway and not feel like you have to make a decision that doesn't feel aligned because you need to get money really quickly, that can sometimes just be a hindrance to your actual success, right? Like, and so with that, even just charging in the early days was strange, because like, again, talking about like doing not what everyone else thinks is cool. When we started our business, people didn't think communities were cool at all. Now everyone talks about communities, but at that time it's like, what are you working on? What else are you working on? Because this can't be the only thing you're working on. And people just like were in like total disbelief. So being a pioneer here, we had to figure out a lot of things from scratch. And even just charging was like a novel idea. Charging for a community, charging a membership. Now everyone has, I feel like, several memberships, but
Yeah.
and so we decided on the subscription model, because I had done all this work to determine what felt values aligned to me. And to me, it felt being accountable to our members, because we could have done a model where we had corporate partners, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I felt then I would be more responsible to the corporate partners than I would be to the members. I also wanted to have something where I wouldn't, similar to raising funding, it would be very binary. Like, are we going to make it? Are we going to hit this milestone or not? And that's why like subscriptions, I thought, made a lot of sense. And at this point, we have 98% of our revenue is subscription revenue, so it's
Oh,
reoccurring
wow.
revenue. And it just, again, I truly think there's no right or wrong, but the more we know about our inner compass, the more we can align how we do things externally with our internal world, and that will be the success of it. And also with that, because it's not that one path will have, again, just rainbow and sunshine. By me deciding to not raise capital, like I'd literally go to networking events and sometimes have people, after they ask 2 or 3 questions, like turn around and talk to someone else because I was not like interesting enough for them. But I embraced that because I knew, like, because of me wanting to bootstrap, because of me wanting to build a sustainable business, I'm totally okay if people don't think I'm very cool. And lo and behold, actually, some of the companies at the time that were like all the hot companies that raised capital, that everyone thought we were so awesome, are no longer around. And it's happened 2 times now where people have actually tried to recruit me for some of these companies as a CEO to help turn the business around. So it's like, so even if you, maybe someone in the audience is in that situation where they're like, hey, everyone thinks I'm crazy for doing what I'm doing. Like, I think you're actually much more likely to succeed when you're working on something crazy than something that everyone else thinks is the coolest thing in the world.
Right, right. So interesting. And I know entrepreneurs, we have many that are in industries that are potentially like oversaturated, and so it can be difficult to stand out. And then the other element, of course, is like, especially, for those who may be new to entrepreneurship or entering an industry that they're unfamiliar with, there's always that confidence element as well. So it's really interesting, and I think entrepreneurs, as they're kind of thinking about external funding and whether that's right for them, really understanding deeply the needs and desires of their community and potentially what that path looks like going forward. And it sounds, it's so interesting that say that, when you first started out, community wasn't like such a cool thing, or nobody was really doing memberships. And now that's like, it really is like it dominates kind of so many industries. And so it's something that entrepreneurs can kind of think about as they're shaping their business model, even is what does the future look like in 3 to 5 years, and how does my community fit into that, and does external funding support that journey,
Yes.
or not? And so that, of course, will be so individual to each person and their business, but wonderful. And so, I think we've touched on this a bit as well, but would love to hear, if you have any examples from your own experience building Dreamers and Doers that, just demonstrates how entrepreneurs can begin to reframe challenges or roadblocks into opportunities for growth. Any other thoughts there?
And I sometimes even need to remind myself, but truly, every single challenge is the biggest opportunity ever. And I think I'm speaking for everyone, where if we think about it, like, I've never had my biggest breakthroughs on my good days. The biggest breakthroughs come when I hit rock bottom. Or, for example, I mentioned Y Combinator, and I'm not sure if it was clear, but we did not get into Y Combinator. And then from the outside, it might be like, oh my gosh, like, you didn't get in. But that was when I just like doubled down on my values and decided, like, I did not want to take external capital. And after that, we actually had a few people, some angels offer it to us, and I was like, no. It just really built up my resolve to do, and it realigned me to myself. And every single other thing that's, I mean, countless. Being an entrepreneur, I feel like, is a battlefield sometimes. But like, if you have like team member transitions, or even like there's maybe a member that's really upset, whatever it is, like, it's either built my resilience, it's had me learn something. And I think the more we embrace it, like, the more we are in the mindset of like, oh no, it's happening to me, this is really bad, then the longer we spend time actually not benefiting from it. But the more, and obviously we should feel the feels, it's so important, but then also realizing that everything is happening for us. And what is it in this moment that's like a lesson that I want to learn? What could come out of this? And even in the moment where we like can't see anything, just like knowing and trusting that we will be okay at the end of the day. And yeah, and it's the biggest growth I've ever experienced internally, and that's then eventually led to external growth, is whenever I felt like I hit rock bottom.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And yeah, I know that's part of many entrepreneurs in the limiting beliefs that they may have is, a lack of trust in themselves or in their, business or its ability to grow and become kind of what they envision. And so would love to hear a little bit more about the role of trusting your gut and how did that shape dreamers and doers? How did you balance instinct with data-driven decision making?
Yes. So in the early days, building a business and building it from scratch and not monetizing in the early days, I was just so determined, like, I want this to work so badly. And then maybe still like from the conditioning, good girl conditioning or conditioning from school, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? What are the right steps? As if there was like a playbook. I'm like, I just need to figure out what the quote unquote right steps were. And then people were also so kind and they provide a lot of input. But obviously their input is like, sometimes they also be very like strong about the input, like this is what you have to do. And I would be very impressionable as an early stage founder, be like, okay, let me try this, or maybe let me try that, just to realize that I really needed to determine what worked for me and figure out my own formula. And I remember this very pivotal moment towards the early days where we actually invited a lot of our members for this gathering, and we had them all provide feedback.
Mm.
And you'd think like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. You should get all this feedback. But that moment was one of the moments I got the least done ever, because let's say there were 30 people, we got 30 different opinions, right? And then I was just so confused. I'm like, what do I do? And that was actually a moment where I took a really big step back and actually didn't look at data at all for a little while, because I'm like, okay, I only got this far because I must have some decent gut. It isn't like that the gut just comes from nowhere. It is actually based on some data. And then based on that, let me like actually not at all look at anything that anyone wants me to do, and let me just go with my gut only. And I'm so happy I did this, because we chatted about like, oh, if you try to like plan ahead what's going to happen, if you then you can only achieve so much, right? Like if I had just taken the input. But if I go more with my gut and I'm just like dreaming even bigger, you can have more outsized impact. So at that time, people were saying like, oh, you should start a co-working space or maybe do conferences, do retreats, like things that I personally just don't enjoy doing. And had I listened on the input, I would have never started PR hype machine. No one came up with the idea of like, oh, maybe you should provide visibility for your members.
Yeah.
And it's obviously always a balance. So what I like, my personal favorite approach of doing it is taking gut as a baseline. I'm taking my gut just because, yeah, that helps me like be more innovative. And then once I've tested things, then I look at the data like, oh, like, are people actually enjoying this? Are people signing up? While also not giving up too early, because actually that's a great example. I think it was like Amazon's marketplace, where now they have outside sellers. I think they launched it 3 times until it actually worked. And sometimes that's it too. Like if you just look at the data and not based on your gut, you might give up too early. So like having that nice dance between those two things is really important.
Right, right. Ah, that's such an, I think that like is so great and kind of just like demonstrating what that can look like for entrepreneurs. And we talked a little bit about, gathering feedback earlier and what that can do in terms of like, really validating what you're doing as a business. And so, really trusting your gut is so crucial in taking these steps that will bring your business towards the vision that you have. So that's wonderful. And of course, as you've talked about so much, collaboration and mutual support are really at the heart of what Dreamers and Doers does. And so how did you foster a culture where members actively support one another to create collective success? How do you keep them engaged and excited about what Dreamers and Doers is all about?
I'm so excited to dive into this. And I have to add that also so much of this is turning what could potentially be a weakness into a superpower. And I think I firmly believe our biggest strength is always also a flip side for a weakness, but we need to create environments where our strengths can be strengths. So when I still used to be in finance, I'm just naturally like a giver. And if you're in more male dominated industries or in certain business environments, like that can come to your detriment, right? Because like, oh, if you're more cutthroat, sometimes you succeed more. But then what we're doing at Dreamers Doers, we like very consciously decided we want to turn mutual support into a competitive edge, right? Like something that might historically have held us back, we want to turn into our superpower. So we specifically connect givers with each other, where we believe 1 + 1 can equal 100, and it's all about making the pie bigger for everyone involved. So with that, one, it starts with the curation. So obviously, like, who do we invite into the room, into our virtual space? And we believe the onboarding already starts the moment they go into our website, and then they see different verbiage that we use. This is really about giving back rather than like, this is what you get. So it's a mix of the two. Then also when you fill out the application, like that they show up, like how would you like to contribute in addition to what would you like to receive, and also sharing something that we have this question, like, what's the personal experience that has most shaped you? So we're already inviting individuals to show up in a certain way, and also in some way self-select themselves. Because some people probably start the application, they're like, oh, this is not for me, right? Like talking about niches and just finding your people. So one is like the curation. And then in addition to that, it's also the container we set. Because sometimes you can have one and the exact same group of people. It's just called 10 people at this event and exact same people at a different event. Depending on the container you set, these individuals will behave differently. So with that, one part is like obviously having some community guidelines and being really clear about them. In our case, for example, it involves like mutual support, as well as like not being salesy, although members hire each other all the time, but not proactively selling, as well as like how we communicate as a team communicate, how we've structured the spaces online. So there's a space called Real Talk and Personal, brags and gratitude. So it's those two things, the curation as well as like the ongoing structure, communication, the container that makes that possible. And then obviously it doesn't happen a lot because of the curation, but like if there ever is someone that isn't quite a fit, we will take an action. So that's also really important, having those three factors.
Yeah, really interesting, and so much for entrepreneurs in the audience to think about if they're kind of looking to optimize and grow their own communities. Awesome. And so, of course, an underlying theme here is loyalty, and building loyalty has been so key to your community's success. And so, for entrepreneurs in the audience that are kind of looking to achieve the same effect, what strategies have you found to be most effective for cultivating that long-term trust that we talked about, and consistent engagement among members?
So anytime talking about trust, I actually think it starts somewhere else than strategy. It starts with who you are as a person and what you infuse into the company, right? Like if it's like, oh, and also the reason for why you want to build trust. If you're just like, oh, I just want to build trust so that I can, have all this revenue, like, maybe you could like fake it for a little bit, but I think it's going to be really, really hard. So even just like, yeah, starting out with like, and that's also where the part comes in of like taking care of yourself in some way, so that you can provide a space that evokes trust is so important. Because like, yes, I could provide a list of like, oh, these 10 things work really well, but people will notice that it's fishy. So with that, it's like one, making sure that it comes from the right place, the intention of wanting to build trust and loyalty. And then from there, there are some practical things to consider. So for example, in our case, we are a virtual first community. And I believe over communication is always important, but in a virtual space more than ever. So really sweating the details, really thinking about like the touch points, and in so much, I'm actually so proud of this, but so much of what we do, so much of that happens behind closed doors that no one would ever see. Just like how the team shows up, like means so much to me. So you should sometimes see, like sometimes members have to cancel for various reasons, and then we've had such. And technically that's like someone where like maybe other businesses wouldn't invest in like kind communication, but we still invest into that kind communication because it's the right thing to do. And I think that because we don't just do it for business reasons, we do it because it's part of our fiber. And for that reason, it actually works for business reasons too, if that makes sense, right? Because if you're just trying to fake it, like it is a strategy to do that, but it won't last as long, right? So yeah, I guess like for anyone who does want more tangible points, it's like really showing your members or your customers that you care, and finding these touch points that can help bring the human side across.
So great. Yes, really just goes to show the importance of, identifying and embodying those values that are so meaningful to you, and finding and connecting with others who also hold those same values so diligently. So amazing. Gesche, this has been such an awesome conversation. And before we jump into some live Q&A, I just want to ask, what are your thoughts on just the importance of prioritizing slow and steady growth versus kind of quick wins? And how has this kind of approach shaped the long-term vision and stability of dreamers and doers?
I'll first say that I don't actually think quick wins are wrong necessarily, or that it's wrong to fundraise. I do think too many people optimize for that, and it's such a shame in terms of how many companies never get to add any or much value because they prioritize such too much. And I think sometimes I like the approach also of like maybe even building a certain base of slow and steady and then optimizing for more growth. But it's interesting too, if you look at like how we've done things, it's nearly the exact inverse and exact opposite what some people might consider as business best practices. Yet 11 years in now, we are doing well. And it was, I mean, some people might be like, oh, but you're not a billion-dollar company. But also like there's probably a billion companies that have tried to be a billion-dollar company that are no longer around. But some examples are we don't accept everyone who applies, right? Like you need to actually apply. And then if you aren't aligned, you will not get accepted. Also, we accept members only once a quarter. We, invest in things that other people be like, why are you investing in this? But it just is the right thing to do in terms of values and taking care of our members. So for us, it all comes down back to my because in the end of the day, everyone as a founder will have the biggest impact in terms of culture and the strategic decision. So it all came back to my inner compass and what was important to me, which was having the biggest impact possible in our members' lives. And with that, the slow and steady approach was the approach that made the most sense for us.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, that absolutely. Yeah, so again, it's kind of that thing of like looking at your individual situation, and of course it's going to depend on like different scenarios, and yeah, it's not, completely black and white. But I think that really does kind of demonstrate the value of moving slow to eventually move fast. So awesome. This has been so wonderful. And we do have a little bit of time for live Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question for Gesche, please drop it in that Q&A box at the bottom. So let's jump in here. I know we have a few folks in the audience asking about, what a subscription model looks like. How does, is this model similar to a cooperative? Can you just talk more about, what a subscription model looks like for a community and how that's worked well for you?
Yeah, and it can look quite different, obviously, across communities, but I'd say the number one factors are like what is the actual amount and what's the cadence. And I'd say like the most traditional subscriptions, memberships are ongoing. I'm seeing a little bit of a trend that now some communities are like, oh, we'll give you like lifetime access, but that isn't a true subscription, obviously. But it's an interesting trend that's worth noting. And there's pros and cons with that. For us, what we opted for was you can pay quarterly or you can pay annually. And then if you pay annually, similar to maybe a software subscription, you get 2 months essentially in addition. You basically just pay for 10 months. So
Right.
that's how we have done it. And we like the model because it has, rather than like having I mean, there's some interesting parts about lifetime, but at the same time, then it can impact engagement and it can impact how individuals show up.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is so true that it can look so different for each individual business, especially across industries, but super helpful. Awesome. We have somebody else asking, I think you kind of mentioned towards the beginning, as you're talking about the origins of Dreamers and Doers, this person is asking, did you only have this business idea or you had more and then decided to go with this, for those who may be in the audience that kind of are really that entrepreneurial spirit, what are your thoughts on kind of, I know you talked about how you kind of knew that Dreamers and Doers could be a business. So, wondering your thoughts here on just kind of like honing in on a single need to address.
Yes. And for me, like there's other businesses that I worked on, and I'll give some examples. So one was at the time I was living in New York, and I just noticed that, oh, during the day, a lot of like coffee shops, restaurants are closed. I wonder if we can leverage this underutilized inventory of spaces to maybe do co-working. And then it was interesting, actually, then some of the ideas ended up merging because I was hosting Dreamers Doers event, but I was also reaching out to restaurants, be like, oh, can we co-work from here, and kind of like testing out ideas. And then, but in that idea, I kind of described one version of it, but I probably had like 10 versions of it, because as I was executing on it, I kept like evolving the idea. And then there was some other ideas that were like completely unrelated that I was also tinkering with. And everyone will be a little bit different here. But for me, because I'm an ideas person, what was actually more important was having something that I could just stick with and I was so passionate about. And because I had started doing Dreamers Doers on the side, and it basically was the thing I wasn't strategic. The one thing I wasn't thinking strategically about was the one thing that ended up becoming my business, because I wasn't thinking about like what's the strategy that makes the most sense, but I just did what I could not stop working on, which was gathering individuals. And then by seeing the impact, and then even having people be I was responsible in some ways for like other people because they had come to rely on Dreamers Doers so much. I felt like I couldn't let them down. So for better or worse, it was a bit of my kryptonite. And I'm so grateful that it was that, because like otherwise I wouldn't be doing this still like 11 years later, right? So that version will look a little bit different. So in my case, like some of my biggest limiting beliefs, or some of the way I'm wired, which is a superpower and a weakness, is like I feel like I want to contribute so much to the world, and I feel like I'm never contributing enough. So that is my biggest strength, and it sometimes can also be my biggest weakness. But because of that, I felt like I couldn't let anyone down, and because of that, I powered and persevered through, some really tough things, especially in the early days, to bring Dreamers Doers to where it is today, because I didn't want to let the women down that had benefited so much from this community.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, so helpful. Amazing. And, I think we have a couple folks in the audience that are wondering, if you could build your community, your business from scratch again today, is there anything you would do differently and why?
It's such a good question. So I obviously, the first time around, needed to, every single challenge, every single heartache, and sometimes like heartbreak, I needed to go through to be who I am today. If I were to start a second business tomorrow, I would do things differently. For one, I was in the early days working every single second, like nonstop. And I would be so hard on myself, like, oh, if I wasn't further along, I was like, oh, I just didn't work enough. And I would not do that again, where I think it is so important to have the time to reflect, to question things, to ask more for help, to test things out more. And maybe I would even consider, I do like the idea, since I do like self-funding businesses, but maybe like if we were to start something new, we can leverage a different business, or maybe consulting on the side, because I think you having a longer runway, you just make and allowing the space for abundance and flow, and also your mindset is different. I mean, it's different. So some people might be like, I need intense pressure and I perform the best, I make my best decisions, and that's perfect. You will need to know what works for you. For me, I do need a little bit of like space in order to do my best thinking, my best work, and really not make decisions based on nearly desperation, I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting, and something I know on entrepreneurs in the audience, may think about in their own journey as well. So wonderful. And, I think this is a really interesting question. We have somebody here asking, was there ever a time when you noticed your community's enthusiasm dipping, and how did you kind of navigate bringing that spark back?
So I think so much of it is like perception, right? Like I
Yeah.
used to say, because now we always accept members quarterly, and especially in the early days. Now I have a team, but in the early days, you're usually like a 1-person or 2-person show. And I'd always say like my emotional state. I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's kind of nice to get to hear this. Is just before, when we were collecting applications, like I'd kind of feel down and be like, oh my gosh, so what, we're doing enough? Are we providing enough value? And then the moment members joined, we're like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. It would go up. So it'd be like kind of a big valley and a big mountain. And so it's worth noting this, because I think like and there's ways to, because mindset is so important, there's some very practical ways to address it. And I will address the enthusiasm question, but I do think this is important. For example, now within Slack, we have what you could call it maybe a happy channel, because like if someone cancels, like in the past, I had gotten a notification, but I wouldn't get a notification every time someone renewed. So let's say you'd have literally like 10 times or sometimes 20 times more people renewing, just the way the notifications were set up. I'd focus on the negatives, quote unquote negatives, right? So I think there's some really simple ways to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be the one answering these emails. Maybe I can set something up structurally to have it, obviously you don't want to be in denial, right? Like you don't want to be running your business in denial, not look at the numbers. But I think because we know this about human nature, that we overweight negatives, I think it's really important to be proactive about it. And I say this because of this question, because I think the moment, even like how it's worded, it's like when enthusiasm is dipping, it all comes from you. So even when you're showing up and you're like, you're already coming with the assumption of like enthusiasm is down, right? Like the way you're going to show up is already going to impact, it's already going to impact how you show up and how others react to you. So that's one part. And then, yes, I mean, it goes in waves. And I think it's so hard to actually know what engagement is, because you might think like, oh, if let's say you have an online forum, you might be like, oh, the numbers are down, but you're not seeing the one-on-one conversations that are happening behind the scenes. So it's actually really hard to measure. But on a more concrete level, there is a lot that you can do, of course. And it depends so much on the nature of the community. One platform I love is called Gather Round, and it's one of the lowest lift ways of building connections. It's basically a platform where it matches individuals. It's super fun. Like basically, we've never, not even once gotten, all the feedback is like, it's impossible to have negative feedback nearly on hosting a gather round event. And it's like so exciting, but it depends if you have a type of community where members actually meet face to face. And I think that's the thing too, like it comes from you. So it's really hard to come up with a really authentic and really creative and 10x idea of engagement when, if you yourself are coming from a place of like, ooh, what I'm building maybe is not good enough. And I've been there, I've thought that many times. Or like, oh, it's going in the wrong direction. Like it's good. Maybe you can come up with some ideas, but they're just not going to be as impactful as they are if you're coming from a place of like, yeah, shifting your beliefs around why this might be happening, or if it's happening in the first place, it's actually happening in the first place.
Right, right. Oh, that's so interesting, really taking a step back and like evaluating, what's your perspective on the situation before creating like an overarching conclusion. So amazing. Gesche, this has been such an incredible conversation. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with folks today, what would that be?
To really trust and believe in yourself, right? It's so easy to be like, oh, let me see how this member, this client, this customer, this partner reacted to me. But we can't make our own self-worth and value dependent on how someone happened to react to us, which has everything to do with them and not ourselves. So really investing in ourselves and doing the inner work, for lack of a better word, that really has us be our own biggest cheerleader, and also that so that we embrace ourselves for who we actually are. Because we can spend all life trying to be someone we're not, or never getting to know who we actually are. And then we haven't lived our own lives. And I dare to say we like, weren't actually alive in many ways, right? So the more we can do that, the more it will impact, especially as an entrepreneur, how we build our businesses, how we attract other people to build with us, and then and how we grow and the ideas that we have and how we evolve them to really be a reflection of who we are.
Amazing, Gesche. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the community, share these insights, and just set such a great overview of the work and the impact that you are creating with Dreamers and Doers. We are going to share some links in the chat. Definitely go connect with Gesche, connect with Dreamers and Doers, check out the opportunities going on there and the impact that they are making for women entrepreneurs. And on behalf of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today, we are just so thankful that you joined us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. I'm rooting for all of you. So nice to spend time with you all.
Thank you. Awesome. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can view using the link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.